I spent nearly my entire retirement fund to pay for my son's wedding. But on the big day, the bride, the woman who never once called me Mom, walked up to me and said coldly, "You're not on the guest list. Please leave." I stood up, but I didn't walk out the way they expected. If you think this is just another family drama, you're wrong. Subscribe now to catch more haunting emotional episodes like this one. The rain had just begun its steady rhythm on the window panes as Evelyn Monroe sat motionless in her high-back armchair, wrapped in a wool shawl older than some of the furniture in her living room. The house was still except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the soft hiss of the tea kettle cooling down on the kitchen counter. She didn't rush to drink it. It had gone cold long ago. Outside, the Oregon fog blanketed Ashbridge in a soft shroud. The kind of fog that made everything look like a memory, half real, half dream. Evelyn had always found it beautiful in a lonely sort of way. She gazed out the wide front window at the street she had lived on for over 4 decades, a street now filled with unfamiliar cars, unfamiliar faces. 76 years of life had a way of dulling the noise of the world, but never the ache. Evelyn was a widow of 20 years. Alfred Monroe had passed in his sleep one wet autumn evening, not too unlike this one, leaving her a single photograph, and a son she'd once believed would carry his father's quiet strength into manhood. The photograph still hung in the hallway, Alfred in his navy blue coat, standing in front of their newly purchased home, a young Derek on his shoulders, both of them laughing. She couldn't remember the last time she had heard her son laugh like that. She glanced at the cold tea and then at the side table where a photo of a teenage girl in a graduation gown sat in a bronze frame, Mia, her only granddaughter, her only softness now. The doorbell rang. She didn't flinch. Instead, Evelyn rose slowly, her knees groaning, her hand reaching for the cane that leaned against the side of the chair. As she approached the door, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror, silver hair pinned up tightly, pearl earrings, cardigan buttoned to the throat, dignity intact. When she opened the door, the fog rolled in behind the 2 silhouettes on the porch. Derek stood in front, tailored in a charcoal gray coat, his shoulders broad, his tie knotted too tight. He had his father's jawline, but none of his steadiness. Behind him stood a woman Evelyn had never seen before, tall, striking, with curled auburn hair and eyes the color of wet stone. "Hi, Mom," Derek said, stepping forward to kiss her cheek, but not waiting for her to return the gesture. "This is Candace." Evelyn gave a small nod, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. Candace breezed past her like she owned the hardwood floors, her perfume leaving behind a trail of gardenia and steel. Evelyn shut the door and turned toward them. Derek had already made himself at home, removing his coat, sitting down on the same couch where he once played with wooden blocks. Candace remained standing, scanning the room with the sharp gaze of someone assessing value. Her eyes lingered on the bookshelf, the antique clock, the Persian rug Evelyn and Alfred had bought on their honeymoon in Santa Fe. "It's charming," Candace said. "So much character." Evelyn offered no reply. Derek leaned forward, hands clasped the way he did before pitching a deal. "We wanted to talk to you in person," he said. "Something important." Evelyn sat down across from them, the chair creaking beneath her. Candace smiled, the kind of smile Evelyn had seen too many times during her years as a literature teacher. The smile of a student trying to flatter her way to an A. "We're getting married," she said, flashing a diamond the size of a small glacier. "Spring, Glasswater Estate." Evelyn's brows lifted slightly. Glasswater Estate was a hilltop mansion overlooking the Willamette River, reserved for senators, celebrities, and the kind of people who threw 6-figure weddings to prove they mattered. "That sounds ambitious," Evelyn said carefully. Derek nodded quickly. "Yeah, it's a bit of a stretch, I know, but Candace deserves the best." Candace rested a hand on his knee, eyes never leaving Evelyn. "It'll be tasteful, intimate." Evelyn didn't speak. The ticking of the clock filled the space. Derek cleared his throat. "And that's where we'd like to ask for a little help." There it was. Help, Evelyn asked, though she already knew. He leaned forward. "It's just that, well, with the housing market the way it is and business expenses, I was hoping you could co-sign a small loan, just to bridge the gap. Your name would open better terms," Candace chimed in. "It's really just a formality. We'll pay it off right away. It's only to secure the venue." Evelyn's gaze moved slowly from one to the other. Her heart beat a little faster. Not from fear, no, she had stared down death in hospital hallways for decades. This was something colder, a familiar chill in a different form. "And you came all this way to ask for my signature," she said softly. Derek chuckled awkwardly. "Don't be like that. Of course we wanted to share the news. Mia's thrilled for us." Evelyn straightened in her chair. Candace smiled sweetly. She helped Derek pick out the ring. Evelyn said nothing. She had raised Mia for 3 summers straight after the divorce. When Derek vanished into work and his ex-wife struggled with a new life, it was Evelyn who brushed Mia's hair, taught her how to make pancakes, walked her to school. And yet she was told after the fact. Derek stood. "Mom, we're not asking for a lot. Just your name. The estate needs a signed financial guarantor. It'll make everything easier." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Of course." Relief washed over Derek's face. "I'll need to see everything," she added. "Every document." "Of course," Candace echoed. "We believe in transparency." Evelyn looked her square in the eye. "Do you?" There was a flicker barely perceptible in Candace's expression, but then the smile returned. "I do." Derek rubbed his hands together. "Great. I'll bring the paperwork by later this week. I knew you'd understand." "I always understand," Evelyn replied. "That's what mothers do." She walked them to the door, exchanged brief hugs, and watched them disappear into the mist. Only when their car pulled away did she allow her expression to fall. She walked back into the living room, sat down, and stared at the cold tea. Then she reached for the photo of Alfred, fingers brushing across the frame. "I'm still trying," she whispered, "but it's getting harder." Upstairs in the small room filled with books and letters, a light flicked on. Mia stood in the doorway, clutching her phone. "Was that Dad?" Evelyn looked up and nodded. Mia hesitated. "Did he ask?" Evelyn gave her a tired smile. "Of course he did. I told him not to." "I know you did," Evelyn said. "But he doesn't listen to either of us now, does he?" They sat in silence, the fog pressing closer against the windows. Somewhere outside, church bells chimed 7 times, and inside the house a storm was just beginning to rise. The next morning the fog had thinned, but not enough to lift the heaviness clinging to Evelyn's chest. She moved around the kitchen methodically, the same way she always had, boiling water, measuring out coffee, feeding crumbs to the wrens that tapped at the back window. But her thoughts were elsewhere, tangled somewhere between Derek's request and Candace's smile. She had said yes, or at least she hadn't said no. It wasn't the first time she'd helped Derek financially. Years ago, she'd signed on as a co-signer for his first home, wrote checks quietly to cover Mia's summer camps, and once even sold her wedding pearls to keep him afloat after a business deal fell apart. But this felt different. There had been something transactional in Candace's tone, something too polished, too rehearsed. A salesman's smile dressed in designer shoes. Still, Evelyn told herself this was what mothers did. She swallowed the unease and washed the same plate twice. Later that day, Candace returned alone. She called ahead and said she was in the area, thought she'd stop by and bond a little. Evelyn was mid-prune in her backyard garden when the silver Lexus pulled into the driveway. Candace stepped out in pastel pink heels, balancing a to-go tray with 2 oat milk lattes and a small paper bag. "Surprise," she sang as she walked through the garden gate like she belonged there. "I brought croissants. Almond. Your son says they're your favorite." Evelyn stood and dusted her gloves on her apron. "They used to be." "Well," Candace grinned, "some things never change." They settled at the wrought iron table on the patio. Candace crossed her legs and sipped her coffee daintily as if posing for a photo that might one day end up in a bridal magazine. Evelyn took a sip, then set her cup down. She hated oat milk, but it wasn't worth mentioning. "You have such a charming place," Evelyn, Candace said, gazing around. "It's got so much warmth. You don't see homes like this anymore, real character, real bones." Evelyn said nothing. I imagine Candace continued tracing the rim of her cup. "This must be fully paid off." The words dropped like a stone. Evelyn blinked. "Excuse me." "The house," Candace said with another effortless smile. "It's gorgeous. I'm guessing it's mortgage-free by now, given how long you've lived here. Evelyn tightened her grip on the edge of the table. It is. That's wonderful, Candace beamed. Derek told me you've always been smart with money and practical. Evelyn looked straight at her. Is that why you're here? Candace laughed, a melodic, perfectly pitched sound. Of course not. I just meant it's actually about the loan. The venue's pushing us to confirm the deposit, and the bank said if the guarantor adds real estate collateral, the interest rate drops substantially. Just a technicality. She took another bite of her croissant and chewed slowly. Derek didn't want to burden you with the details, but I thought you deserved to be in the loop. Evelyn sat back. And you think I should put my house up as collateral? Candace leaned in earnest and wide-eyed. Only on paper. No one's asking you to give anything up, just your name and the property listed. It'll be released as soon as the balance is paid. We'd never let it get that far. Evelyn looked away toward the back gate. A blue jay landed on the fence, flapping once before flying off. She wished she could follow it. I'll think about it, she said finally. Candace didn't flinch. She just reached over and gently patted Evelyn's hand. I knew you'd be understanding. It's why Derek loves you so much. But that wasn't the truth. Derek hadn't said I love you in years, not without a reason. As the conversation drifted to floral arrangements and hors d'oeuvres, Evelyn listened but contributed little. Candace spoke in confident bursts, name-dropping vendors and stylists as if reciting credentials. Every sentence was coated in sugar, every suggestion wrapped in false humility. But underneath it all, Evelyn sensed the subtext. You're useful to us as long as you comply. When Candace finally left with an air kiss and promises to circle back soon, Evelyn sat alone under the gray sky and stared at the place where her husband once built a birdhouse. Her coffee had gone cold again. That evening, Mia came by after school. She was finishing her last semester at Lewis and Clark College studying sociology and visited Evelyn at least twice a week. She didn't call it obligation. She called it home. Evelyn poured her a cup of real coffee cream, no sugar, and slid the almond croissant across the table. Mia raised an eyebrow. What's this? Gift from your future stepmother, Evelyn said. Mia sniffed the pastry suspiciously. It smells like performative manipulation. Evelyn chuckled for the first time that day. You're dramatic. No, I'm observant, Mia said, unzipping her coat. So what happened? Evelyn hesitated. She wants me to sign over the house. Mia's eyes widened. What? Not give it away, just list it as collateral on the loan. No, Mia said flatly. It's just paperwork. No. She said it again, firmer. Grandma, she's trying to trap you. Do you know what happens if they default? You'll lose everything. They won't default. You don't know that. And you shouldn't be made to take that risk. It's not your wedding. Evelyn sighed, folding her hands in her lap. She said it would lower the interest rate. Save them money. Of course she did. That's how it starts. Mia stood and began pacing the kitchen. You've always trusted too easily. Dad knows it. Candace knows it. That's why they came to you. She's marrying your father. She's marrying his wallet. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. That's harsh. Mia stopped pacing. You think I'm jealous, don't you? Evelyn softened. I think you care, but you don't see the full picture. No, Grandma, Mia said, her voice shaking slightly. You don't see it. Dad doesn't visit unless he needs something. You sit here alone most days. You pretend it's okay, but it's not. And now he's asking you to risk your house for a woman who's known him for what, a year? 16 months. Right. And how much of that did she spend grooming him? Evelyn stood slowly and walked to the sink. She turned on the water and rinsed the cups. Her movements were careful, controlled. I'm not helpless, Mia. I didn't say you were. I've lived in this house for 42 years. I nursed your grandfather here, raised your father here. I know how to protect it. Then don't sign anything. Evelyn turned off the tap and dried her hands. He's my son. Mia's voice dropped to a whisper. And I'm your granddaughter. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then Evelyn walked over, wrapped her arms around Mia, and held her close. You're the only one who ever truly sees me, Evelyn murmured. And maybe that's the part I'm most afraid of. They stood like that as the light faded outside, the fog curling around the windows once more, like it was trying to crawl inside and steal the warmth from their bones. Evelyn didn't tell Mia about the meeting with the bank set for Monday. She didn't mention the notary appointment Candace had already penciled in. or the papers folded neatly in her dresser drawer. Because sometimes even mothers who know better convince themselves that love, especially for a child, can justify almost anything, even surrendering the very roof over their head. The pen felt heavier than it should have in Evelyn's hand. The paper in front of her was neatly printed, bound with a plastic spine and full of words she didn't entirely understand, but she had told herself again and again that this was trust. Trust in her son. Trust in the woman he'd chosen. She sat in Derek's downtown office, perched uncomfortably on a leather chair too stiff for her aging back. Candace sat beside her, tapping her manicured nails lightly on the table with a rhythm that felt less nervous than it did expectant. Across from them, a notary public watched patiently as Evelyn signed the final page. "There," Evelyn murmured, setting the pen down and exhaling softly. Candace beamed. "Perfect. I'll submit the documents right away. The underwriters will be thrilled." The notary gathered the papers, slid them into a briefcase, and left the room without ceremony. As soon as the door clicked shut, Candace leaned toward Derek and whispered something Evelyn couldn't quite make out. He chuckled, a private joke, one she wasn't part of. Later that evening, back in the quiet of her home, Evelyn pulled out her reading glasses and tried to recall the fine print. Something about property transfer. No, it had been called a temporary restructuring of ownership, or so Candace had explained. Just a formality to satisfy the lender. Her name would remain associated with the house, of course. But when she tried to remember the phrase Candace had used, floating title holder, the meaning blurred like the mist over the backyard. That night Evelyn couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Alfred in her dreams, standing beside the front steps, shaking his head slowly. 3 days passed. Suddenly, Evelyn's calendar was full. Not her own doing. Candace had begun organizing everything: appointments, fittings, tastings, vendor meetings. She sent shared Google invites, texted hourly updates, and called with breathless energy that bordered on manic. "Mrs. Monroe," she said over the phone one morning the florist called. "They've confirmed blush dahlias won't be in season. We'll need to meet Tuesday to decide between peonies or roses, preferably before 10 a.m. "I have a doctor's appointment then," Evelyn replied. "Oh," Candace said, her voice tightening. "Is it serious?" "No, just a checkup." Would it be possible to reschedule? The florist's availability is limited, and these arrangements, well, they reflect the whole aesthetic. Evelyn glanced at her pill organizer. "I'd prefer not to." There was a beat of silence. "Of course, I understand." But the next morning she received a polite voicemail from the florist canceling the meeting due to unforeseen scheduling conflicts. Evelyn hadn't rescheduled her appointment. The next week, Candace arrived with swatches of fabric for the table linens and news that Evelyn wouldn't be giving a toast at the rehearsal dinner after all. "It's just that the timeline's really tight," Candace explained with that ever-pleasant smile. "The planner thinks it's better to keep things streamlined, but we'll include you in the printed program, I promise." Evelyn nodded slowly. Another layer of paint, another inch of distance. By the end of the month, she had gone from mother of the groom to background ornament. Mia noticed immediately. She came over one evening, angry, carrying a large envelope full of printed PDFs and scribbled notes. Her eyes were lit with something fierce. "I looked her up," Mia said, spreading the pages across the kitchen table. Who, Evelyn asked, though she knew. "Candace. She was married before, twice. Her last husband filed for bankruptcy 3 years ago. She claimed she didn't know about the debts, but his attorney said otherwise. Then she vanished, left town, changed her last name." Evelyn stared down at the documents. The headlines were small, buried in local news sites: prominent couple in lawsuit over business fraud. A court docket with Candace's maiden name attached. "She's in debt," Mia continued. "She defaulted on a luxury lease car, owes over 20 grand on a cosmetic procedure, and her last 2 employers filed complaints for misconduct." Evelyn's voice was quiet. "Your father must know." "He doesn't, or he doesn't care, or worse, he's being manipulated." Evelyn pressed a hand to her forehead. "I'm telling you, Grandma," Mia said, "this woman is dangerous." But Evelyn didn't respond right away. She stared at the papers, then folded them neatly and tucked them back into the envelope. She walked to the cabinet, opened a drawer, and placed the envelope inside. "That's enough for tonight. Grandma, please." Mia's frustration filled the room like smoke. You're protecting her. No, Evelyn said, turning to face her. I'm protecting what little I have left. That night, Evelyn stood at her bedroom window, the house wrapped in silence. The moonlight filtered through the fog, making everything glow silver and soft. But her mind was anything but peaceful. In town, Candace was saying things. Evelyn heard it first from June, an old friend from the book club. I ran into Candace at the bakery, June said over the phone, and she mentioned you'd been feeling foggy lately, that the wedding stress was getting to you, that maybe it was time you had someone managing your affairs more closely. Evelyn's stomach twisted. Did she say that? I'm sure she meant well, June added hastily. She said Derek's looking into support options. Support options. The words lingered. By the weekend, 3 more acquaintances made similar remarks. A florist Evelyn had never met told her he hoped she was getting some rest and not pushing herself too hard at this age. A former student sent a card, thinking of you during this difficult transition. It was coordinated. Candace was whispering into ears carefully, systematically. She's planting seeds, Mia said when Evelyn told her. She's softening the ground. If you say anything now, it'll be dismissed as confusion. She's paving the way to control everything. Evelyn stared into her teacup. What would that mean? In this state, she could have your cognitive status assessed, claim you're not of sound mind. If she gets power of attorney, she can take the house, Evelyn finished, even if it's under Derek's name on paper. Evelyn stood slowly, walked to the hallway, stared at the photograph of Alfred holding baby Derek at the county fair. The boy was laughing, arms reaching for the cotton candy hair, wind-blown eyes shining. She had believed truly that raising a son with love would guarantee loyalty, that sacrifices would return in time. But motherhood, she now realized, had no built-in return policy, and love given too freely often became currency in someone else's game. In the mirror across from the photo, she saw herself not as the doting mother she had tried to be, not as the supportive grandmother Mia loved, but as a woman standing at the edge of a battlefield unarmed. And yet, something stirred beneath her chest. Not fear, not yet anger. Resolve. The invitation never arrived. Not a call, not a message, not even a passing mention. The rehearsal dinner. The final dress rehearsal for the most extravagant wedding Ashbridge would see that spring was held on a Friday night at Glasswater Estate, under strings of golden fairy lights and the scent of imported eucalyptus. Everyone was there, the vendors, the planner, the florist, the photographer, even Candace's hairstylist and her stylist's assistant. Everyone except Evelyn. She found out about it from a neighbor. "Oh, you must be so excited," said Mrs. Taggart, as they crossed paths outside the mailbox. "I saw the rehearsals on tonight. They closed off the South Road near the estate. Derek's wedding is going to be the talk of the season." Evelyn nodded, her hands tightening around the envelope she'd just retrieved. "Yes," she said, "it will be memorable." She returned inside and sat on the edge of her bed, watching the dusk fall outside her window. In her lap, a sealed envelope from the lender still waited unopened. Later that night, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Candace. "Quick note, re-attire. Please avoid bold or mismatched tones on the wedding day. We're doing a soft palette champagne ivory dove gray. Want photos to be cohesive, thanks." That was all. No hope you're well, no sorry you missed tonight, no apology, just color coordination. Evelyn sat for a long time staring at the message. Then she turned off her phone and placed it face down on the nightstand. The next morning she pulled out the pale blue dress she had planned to wear. It was elegant with a high collar and subtle embroidery, her favorite. She laid it gently across the bed. The soft morning light caught on the edges of the fabric, turning the floral pattern silver. She knew without needing to be told that Candace had decided it didn't fit the aesthetic. That afternoon she called Derek. He didn't answer. She tried again later. Voicemail. By the third attempt, the robotic voice felt more familiar than her son. On Sunday he came by. Evelyn was in the garden pruning the roses that had just begun to bloom. She didn't look up when she heard the gate creak open. She could smell his cologne before he spoke. "Hi, Mom," Derek said, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the yard like a stranger. She snipped another bloom and placed it into a basket. "You didn't call me back," she said. "I've been busy. With the wedding." He nodded. She turned, finally facing him. "Was I meant to be at the rehearsal?" He hesitated. There was limited space. It was mostly for the vendors and Candace's immediate family. "I'm not immediate family. That's not what I meant." "Then say what you meant." He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "We just didn't want you to be on your feet too long. You've said your knees." "My knees are fine." He glanced away. "I should have told you sooner." Evelyn looked at him, really looked, and saw someone who wasn't nervous or guilty or even apologetic. He was blank, like someone reading a script written by someone else. By her. She had raised him to be polite, composed, strategic, and now here he was saying all the right things for all the wrong reasons. "There's more," he said finally. "About your dress." She raised an eyebrow. "Candace thinks it might clash with the scheme." "My dress." Her voice was quiet. "She was hoping you could wear something softer. Maybe beige." Evelyn stared at him. "Beige or dove gray, ivory, whatever works." "I'm not a ghost." No one said that. She walked past him back toward the kitchen. Derek didn't follow. When she turned back, he was already at the gate. That night Mia came over. She was quiet for the first 10 minutes, pacing Evelyn's room like a cat in a cage. Then without preface she said, "I heard something." Evelyn turned from her dresser. "What?" "I was visiting Dad's place earlier. He wasn't home, but Candace was. She was in the office on the phone. She didn't know I was outside the door." Evelyn didn't move. She was talking about selling the house. Evelyn blinked. She said once the wedding's done, the paperwork would be easier. That with the property now out of your name, it would clean up the portfolio. Those were her words. Evelyn sat down slowly on the edge of her bed. Mia stood still, fists clenched. "She's planning something. I don't know how far it goes, but it's not just about the wedding anymore." Evelyn didn't speak for a long time. Then she said she never asked about Alfred. "What?" "She never asked about your grandfather. Never once wondered what kind of man I'd married or what kind of father Derek had." She looked at the house, the antiques, the land, and saw equity, not memory. Mia sat beside her. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Evelyn asked softly. "Because I didn't want to believe it," Mia admitted. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt sharper, like something slicing through the air. Then Evelyn stood. "I'm not wearing beige," she said. The day began with an unnatural quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the hollow sort. The kind that settles before a storm, when even the birds fall silent and the air feels like it's holding its breath. Evelyn woke at 6. She had barely slept. Her lavender dress hung neatly from the door, pressed, and waiting its silver trim, catching the early light in dull glimmers. She put it on slowly, deliberately. Her hands didn't tremble. Her movements were clean, decisive. Each button, each stroke of the hairbrush, each clasp of silver jewelry done with intention. Today wasn't about celebration, it was about clarity. At 9:30 the car arrived. A black town car, sleek and silent, sent by Candace, of course. The driver didn't speak as he opened the door. Evelyn nodded a quiet thank you and slid into the back seat, holding nothing but her purse and a folded handkerchief in her lap. Glasswater Estate emerged from the mist like something out of a dream. White stone, ivy-covered walls, balconies overlooking the manicured cliffs that dropped into the Willamette River. But there was no awe in Evelyn's eyes as they passed through the gates, only calculation. The driver pulled up to the side entrance. Evelyn stepped out, heels clicking softly on cobblestone. Inside, music hummed faintly in the distance, Vivaldi probably, or something equally curated. No one greeted her. No usher, no host, no family. She found her name on a place card near the service corridor of the grand ballroom. Table 12, near the back. Not family, not friends, just present. The table was filled with vague acquaintances, business associates, a retired florist, and a man Candace had once met at a charity auction. No one Evelyn recognized. No one who knew the color of the curtains in her kitchen or how Alfred used to laugh when Derek said spaghetti as paschetti. The ceremony had been flawless, of course. A sea of ivory and blush-perfect symmetry. A choreographed walk down the aisle to an orchestral swell. Candace had glowed her dress dripping with crystals. Derek stood stiff, handsome, distracted, and Evelyn watched from her distant seat, hands folded in her lap like a relic on display. It wasn't until the cocktail hour, when the guests had dispersed into the garden for champagne and oysters, that Mia slipped beside her. "Grandma," she whispered, slipping a flash drive into Evelyn's hand. "Listen to it before dinner." "What is it?" Mia's jaw was tight, her voice low. "Confirmation." Then she disappeared back into the crowd. Evelyn didn't wait. She found the nearest coat closet, ducked inside, and slid the flash drive into her phone. She'd learned the basics of this device thanks to Mia. Today that knowledge felt like armor. She pressed play. Candace's voice filled her ears, hushed, clipped, and unmistakably calculating. "I've told him after the wedding we'll streamline. The house sells first, then we restructure. She won't fight it. She's too proud. Besides, I've already laid the groundwork. People think she's slipping." A male voice responded, faint, unsure. "You're sure she'll go quietly?" Candace laughed. "She'll go cold." Evelyn stood there for a long time after the recording ended, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a clarity so sharp it hurt. They had taken everything: her name, her home, her dignity, but not her voice. By the time dinner began, Evelyn had composed herself. The ballroom gleamed under chandeliers. Guests clinked glasses. Candace floated through the room like a swan in silk. Derek followed close behind, silent and decorative, and then Candace stepped up to the microphone. Her voice rang clear through the speakers. "I want to thank all of you for being here on the most magical day of my life," she said, eyes glistening, "and for supporting not just a wedding but a union of two families, two legacies. And of course," she paused, flashing her perfect teeth, "those who have stood by us unconditionally through every challenge." She didn't glance at Evelyn once. A wave of applause followed, polite, predictable. Evelyn rose. She didn't need a microphone. She stepped slowly, deliberately down the center aisle of the ballroom, her lavender dress trailing behind her like smoke. The room shifted. Murmurs bloomed. Candace froze. Derek blinked. Mia from the shadows watched in silence. Evelyn reached the front and stood not beside the bride or the groom, but squarely in front of the audience. She faced them all, and for the first time in years she raised her voice. "Some of you may not know who I am," she said, voice calm, crisp. "I'm the mother of the groom." Gasps rippled. "And until recently the legal owner of the house that funded most of today's festivities." Candace stepped forward. "Evelyn, please." Evelyn turned slightly, silencing her with a look. "I wasn't invited to the rehearsal. I was asked not to speak. I was told my dress might ruin the photos. I was given a seat next to strangers while my family laughed at another table. And I accepted all of it, until I heard the truth." She held up her phone. "I'd like you all to hear it too." She played the audio. Candace's voice filled the ballroom, loud and unmistakable. "She'll go cold." When it ended, there was no applause, no movement, just silence. Horrified, electric silence. Evelyn lowered the phone. "For those wondering, yes, that was the bride," she said, "speaking about me." She turned to Derek. "I raised you better than this," she said, voice breaking slightly. "I taught you loyalty, kindness, how to look a person in the eye when you're about to betray them." He said nothing. Candace's face had gone pale. The guests sat frozen in their chairs, forks half raised. Evelyn looked out across them one last time. "I will no longer fund this wedding," she said, "or this marriage. I will not endorse cruelty disguised as charisma or manipulation masked as elegance." She turned. "I wish you all a pleasant evening." And with that she walked out of the ballroom, past the marble pillars, past the stunned silence, past the petals scattered like ashes across the floor. Outside, the fog had returned, and Evelyn disappeared into it like a woman finally claiming her own outline. For a brief, breathless moment, the silence inside Glasswater Estate was sacred. No clinking glasses, no string quartet, just stillness, thick, stunned, and raw. Evelyn's footsteps had faded down the marble corridor, but her words still rang through the rafters. On the stage, Candace stood paralyzed, lips parted, eyes flicking from guest to guest, as if scanning for someone, anyone who could rewrite what had just happened. No one moved, and then the room cracked. A wave of whispers erupted. Heads turned. Some guests leaned into each other. Others sat stiff, as if afraid to be seen, responding. A bridesmaid near the back dropped her champagne flute, the sharp crash slicing through the noise like a scream. Candace snapped. She spun toward Derek, her face distorted into something that no longer resembled the poised woman who had just toasted unconditional love. "You said she wouldn't do anything," she hissed. "You said she was too old, too passive, too—" Derek held up both hands. "Candace, you told me she wouldn't come up here, that she wouldn't even understand what we signed." "Keep your voice down," he muttered, eyes darting toward the crowd. But it was far too late for that. Candace turned back to the guests. Her voice trembled with fury, dressed as explanation. "She doesn't know what she's talking about," she announced. "She's been confused lately. It's age, hormones, she's not well." "She seemed very clear to me," someone murmured from a nearby table. "I have documentation," Candace snapped, glaring in the general direction of the voice. "And Derek can back it up. It's all legal. Everything we did was within the law." Mia stood. She wasn't at the front, not yet, but her presence sliced through the chaos like a match dropped into dry grass. "I heard the tape," she said loudly. "I gave it to her." Candace froze. "She didn't twist anything. You did. You manipulated her, isolated her, and humiliated her. And now you're lying in front of a room full of strangers who already know the truth." Candace laughed, but it was hollow. "You're just a child." "I'm 22. Old enough to read public records," Mia replied. "Old enough to dig up bankruptcies, restraining orders, forge signatures, should I keep going." A hush fell over the ballroom again, this time laced with a different kind of tension. Candace stepped back, visibly shaken. Then Derek moved. He walked slowly to the mic, his tie loosened, face pale. He didn't look at Mia, didn't look at his bride. He looked at the crowd, then at the floor. "My mother signed the papers," he said quietly, "of her own will." Mia's face twisted in disbelief. "You coerced her," she agreed. "She didn't know what she was signing." Mia's voice broke. "You told her it was a cosign. You knew she trusted you. You used her loyalty against her, and you watched her become invisible at her own son's wedding." Derek flinched. A heavy man in a burgundy vest walked toward the stage. He carried a clipboard and moved like someone used to being obeyed. It was the estate's event coordinator. "Mr. Monroe," he said in a clipped tone. "Apologies for the interruption, but there's an urgent matter." Derek turned grateful for a distraction. "What is it?" "There's an issue with the payment schedule." Derek blinked. "What?" "We received word this morning that the secondary guarantor account was withdrawn. That leaves the remaining balance." The man checked his clipboard. $73,000 unsettled. Derek's eyes widened. "That's not possible." "Unless you have an alternate payment method," the man said, his tone growing firmer. "We'll need to begin shutting down the event within the hour." Gasps fluttered across the room. Candace stepped forward. "No, that's absurd." "We submitted the paperwork." "To a lender," the coordinator cut in, voice sharp, "who approved your line of credit only because Mrs. Monroe's assets were pledged as collateral. She has since withdrawn those." All eyes turned toward Candace. Her skin turned blotchy, her breathing erratic. "She can't do that. She doesn't have the legal capacity." Mia stepped forward now, walking straight down the aisle. "You filed paperwork declaring her incompetent." Candace opened her mouth, then shut it. Mia looked around. "Let me guess. Guardianship petitions quietly in probate court. But it hasn't gone through yet, has it?" Candace's silence was answer enough. The event coordinator tapped his pen. "We'll need that payment resolved within 30 minutes. Otherwise, we'll begin disassembling the venue space." "You can't be serious," Derek muttered. But he was already being ignored. Behind them, the caterers had stopped serving. 2 waiters began quietly stacking chairs near the back. The illusion was unraveling. Evelyn stepped back into the ballroom. No grand entrance this time. She walked with measured grace to where Mia stood and touched her arm gently. "I didn't leave," she said. Mia looked up surprised. "You came back?" "I never left," Evelyn replied. "I just stepped aside. Long enough for the lies to fall apart on their own." Candace turned on her. "This was supposed to be my day." "It still is," Evelyn said, her voice like ice. "A day people will remember for all the wrong reasons." Derek stared at her, something finally breaking through the fog behind his eyes. "Mom?" "No," she cut in. "You don't get to mom me now." Mia raised the flash drive again. "This is going to the police." Candace snapped toward Derek. "Do something!" But he didn't move, because suddenly, for the first time in weeks, maybe years, he had nothing to say. No excuses, no sales pitch, just shame. And in that silence, the chandeliers still glittered. The string quartet began quietly packing up their instruments. The ivory wedding cake remained untouched. The marriage that had just begun already lay in ruins, shattered not by accident but by truth. And Evelyn, the woman who had once feared her own voice, was lost in the mist, stood at the center of it all, no longer invisible. Evelyn walked out of the ballroom without looking back. Her heels tapped against the marble slow and steady, as if each step erased one thread of the life she'd built. Behind her, voices tangled in confusion and gossip. The chandeliers flickered above shocked faces and half-finished glasses of champagne. The once perfect wedding had detonated in front of 200 guests, and now it was unraveling like a torn hem. "Did you hear what she said? Is it true? They stole her house." Candace screamed like a madwoman. She had a recording, played it right there. The whispers followed Evelyn all the way out the doors and into the fog-thick night. The cool air felt like mercy. The night had swallowed the last colors of day, and the path back to the waiting town car was dim. A valet scurried toward her, offering an umbrella she didn't need. She refused it with a small nod of thanks and kept walking. Inside, Derek stood frozen. He hadn't moved since the tape stopped playing, since his mother's voice shattered the performance he'd helped stage. Candace was gone, fled into one of the powder rooms, sobbing into the sleeves of her $1,000 gown. The guests had begun to leave in quiet, uneasy clusters, some trying not to make eye contact, others stealing glances and photos. The estate's coordinator was already barking instructions at the staff to begin clearing out. It was over, and Evelyn hadn't even needed to raise her voice. By morning, the story had spread beyond Ashbridge. A grainy video shot by a cousin of Candace's and uploaded without context had been picked up by a local blogger. Mother of the groom calls out bride's lies in explosive wedding confrontation. Then by noon, a more polished headline hit the regional feed: Oregon bride accused of elder exploitation at lavish wedding confrontation goes viral. By the end of the day, the news anchor from Channel 3 stood outside Glasswater Estate, with a camera crew summarizing the chaos in brisk, sensational tones. Back at her modest home on Cedar Grove Lane, Evelyn sipped tea by the window, watching the fog drift past the hedges. She kept the television off. She didn't need to hear her own name repeated. She had lived the moment in full color. It didn't require a broadcast. Mia sat across from her, silent, scrolling through her phone. 600,000 views in 4 hours, she murmured. They're already dissecting the audio. Evelyn said nothing. Do you think they'll press charges? Who? Candace. Dad. Maybe both. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. That's not up to me. It was nearly dusk when Derek finally appeared. He didn't knock right away. Just stood at the edge of the porch, eyes heavy as if the air itself weighed him down. Mia saw him through the blinds and stood quickly. I'll be upstairs, she said, not hiding the anger in her voice. Evelyn nodded, watching her granddaughter disappear before turning the knob. The door opened. Derek looked like he hadn't slept. His tie was gone, shirt wrinkled, cufflinks missing. There was no pride left in his stance, only desperation. Mommy started. She stepped aside, wordlessly allowing him in. He walked into the living room like it was unfamiliar territory, as if he'd forgotten how the light fell across the old oak table, how the smell of lemon oil and faint cinnamon clung to every corner of this house. Or maybe he had forgotten. I didn't know she recorded me, he said. Evelyn sat. That's not why you're here. He faltered. The venue's threatening legal action. Let them. They're holding me personally responsible for the balance. You are. Derek dropped into the chair across from her, face in his hands. I don't have that kind of money, Mom. You know that. Evelyn said nothing. You could help, he added, quieter. Still, you could make this go away. Just help me pay off the last part. She looked at him the way a surgeon might regard a wound that would never quite heal. I could, she said, but I won't. He flinched. You want me to cover the bill for a wedding I wasn't welcome at? A marriage built on lies I warned you about. After you took the house I raised you in and handed it to a stranger. Derek opened his mouth, but she held up a hand. No, she said, you don't get to justify it. Not this time. He looked up at her, and for a second there was the boy she remembered. Scraped knees, arms too long for his sweaters, eyes wide with unspoken questions. But that boy had grown into a man who chose convenience over conscience. Do you hate me now? He asked quietly. Evelyn's voice cracked. I hate what you became, she said. But I will always love the child I raised, even if that child is buried somewhere beneath a man I can no longer recognize." They sat in silence. Then Derek rose slowly, the weight of years pressing into his shoulders. "I had nowhere else to go," he said. "You had everywhere to go," Evelyn replied. "You just kept choosing the one path that hurt everyone else." He didn't respond. He walked out. Didn't slam the door, didn't say goodbye. He just left. And Evelyn breathed in. Not deeply, not with triumph, but with release. Moments later, she heard soft footsteps on the stairs. Mia rushed down and into the room like a gust of emotion. "Is he gone?" "Yes." Mia stood there for a heartbeat, then collapsed onto the floor beside Evelyn's chair and buried her face in her lap. Tears came hot and full. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I couldn't stop it. I couldn't protect you." Evelyn leaned forward and held her, arms wrapped tight, palms flat against Mia's back, rocking slightly the way she used to when Mia was 5 and frightened of storms. "You saved me," Evelyn whispered. "You gave me the truth. You gave me the strength." They cried together, not just for what had been lost, but for what had finally been seen, for the years that could not be rewritten, for the love that had been taken for granted, and for the possibility, just a flicker, that something better could be built in the wreckage. A new bond, one forged not from obligation but from clarity, from pain, and from love that refused to be erased. The envelope arrived 3 days later, cream-colored heavy stock and embossed with the gilded seal of Glasswater Estates' legal department. Inside, a formal notice of intent to sue. Failure to settle the unpaid event balance constitutes a breach of contract. Legal proceedings will commence within 14 business days. Evelyn read it once, then again, then placed it neatly beside her tea and reached for the phone. She didn't call Derek or Candace. She called Ray. Raymond J. Kirkland, retired district court litigator, now running a small private firm with a heart, a sharp pen, and an iron memory. He'd been a friend of Alfred's back in the day, attended Evelyn's book club, once declared Faulkner too damn cryptic, and never returned but always sent pies on holidays. When he answered the phone, he was halfway through pruning a fig tree in his backyard. "Evie," he said. "What in the world?" "They're trying to sue me," Evelyn replied, her tone calm, precise. "I need your help." "You have my attention." Within 48 hours, Ray had pulled the contract, the property deed, the tape Mia had saved, and the video that had now surpassed 1 million views online. The story had spread beyond Oregon, picked up by morning news segments and consumer advocacy groups. Phrases like elder coercion, reverse fraud, and emotional inheritance abuse were suddenly trending hashtags. Ray sat across from Evelyn at her kitchen table, sleeves rolled, legal pad filled with notes. He flipped the page. "They don't have a case," he said plainly. "They have lawyers," Evelyn replied. "They also have motive, digital evidence of manipulation, and a mountain of public scrutiny. If they press this, they'll bleed in discovery. Frankly, I hope they do." He leaned forward. "And if you're willing, we can counterclaim." Evelyn paused. "For what?" "Fraud, undue influence, reputational harm, emotional distress. We could go further if we dig." She looked down at her hands. "I'm not interested in vengeance." Ray smiled faintly. "This isn't vengeance, this is defense with teeth." She looked him in the eye. "Then let's bear them." 2 days later, Candace came back. Not in heels this time, not in silk or diamonds. She wore jeans, a cardigan, and flats, her hair pulled into a messy bun, her makeup barely applied. She rang the bell and waited. Evelyn opened the door. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Candace offered a carefully folded smile. "Hi, Evelyn." Evelyn said nothing. "I just wanted to stop by." Candace continued. "To apologize. For everything. I wasn't myself. Things got out of control. I've been under pressure, Derek, too, and I know it's no excuse." Evelyn studied her face. "And yet here you are." Candace clasped her hands. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly." She reached into her bag, pulled out a Tupperware container. "Cookies. Snickerdoodles from the scent I baked," she said softly. "I thought maybe we could talk." Evelyn stepped aside, letting her in without a word. They sat across from each other in the same room where Evelyn had once rocked Derek to sleep. Candace placed the container between them. "I know I can't undo the past," she began, "but I want to make things right." Evelyn folded her arms. "Define right." Candace hesitated. "Maybe we could settle this privately. No courts, no press, just Resolve it woman to woman. For Keith. Evelyn's brow furrowed. Keith. Candace leaned forward, voice low and intimate. My nephew. He's only 14. Lives with me now. If I go through a public trial, if my assets are frozen, he loses his school, his stability, his health insurance. He has a heart condition. Evelyn didn't blink. You're threatening me with a child. I'm asking you for mercy. No, Evelyn said, her voice firm. You're asking me to carry your consequences. Again, under a prettier banner. Candace's jaw tightened. I'm trying to protect someone I love. So was I, Evelyn replied. But love without boundaries becomes debt. And I've paid enough. A beat passed. Candace's expression shifted just slightly. The softness gave way to steel. I thought maybe we could handle this with dignity, she said. But if you're choosing this path, just know I won't go down alone. Evelyn stood. Then take your cookies and go. Candace rose slowly. You think the internet's going to protect you? Sympathy has a shelf life. I'm not protected by sympathy, Evelyn said. I'm protected by truth and a damn good lawyer. Candace's smile collapsed. You'll regret this. I've regretted too many things already, Evelyn replied. But not this. Candace turned sharply and walked out. Evelyn waited until the sound of her tires faded into the distance before she finally sat down. Mia appeared in the doorway, silent. Did she really think cookies would change your mind? Mia asked. Evelyn smiled faintly. She thought fear would. Mia stepped forward. Are you afraid? Evelyn looked out the window. The fog had lifted for the first time in days, and the sun shone through like a quiet revelation. No, she said, I'm not afraid anymore. The for sale sign went up on a rainy Thursday morning. It stood crooked in the front yard, like a final punctuation mark at the end of a long, winding sentence. Passers-by slowed their cars. Neighbors whispered behind curtain folds, and some came by to check in with baskets of muffins or overly curious questions. Evelyn smiled politely. She knew what they were really asking. Are you okay? The truth was she was. For the first time in decades, Evelyn Monroe wasn't holding on out of guilt or habit or some distorted sense of family loyalty. She was letting go on her own terms. The house sold within a week. It wasn't hard. It was a beautiful piece of property, after all, timbered oak floors, hand-carved moldings, a garden wrapped in stories. But Evelyn didn't watch the sale happen. She was already packing boxes with Mia, her hands wrapped around old photo frames and dog-eared novels. By the time the check cleared, she had signed a lease for a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a brick building in downtown Ashbridge. From her windows, she could see the spire of the public library across the street. On clear days, when the sunlight hit just right, the stained glass on its highest arch glimmered like forgiveness. The apartment was small, but it held everything she needed. A bed, a desk, a kettle, and peace. But Evelyn hadn't moved here just for simplicity. She had a plan. One she and Mia had scribbled onto napkins and spreadsheets late into the night, long before she'd left the old house behind. The plan was to build something that hadn't existed before. Something for people like her. It began with a dusty storage room in the back of the library, unused, underfunded, and forgotten. Evelyn spoke to the director, a soft-spoken man named Gerald, who wore corduroy jackets and always carried 3 pens. She pitched the idea with clarity and force. A community learning room, she said. Not just for books, for skills, for memory, for dignity. Gerald was hesitant at first. Our funding's tight, Mrs. Monroe. I'm not asking for your funding, she said. I'm bringing my own. And she did. With the leftover money from the house sale, Evelyn and Mia transformed the room. Fresh paint, bookshelves, gently used laptops lined up along the wall, a corner for quiet reading, another for workshops, and a sign on the door. The Foglight Room, a place to begin again. The name had been Mia's idea. Because fog always lives, she said. They opened quietly, no ribbon cutting or ceremony. Just a handwritten flyer posted around town and a short announcement in the Ashbridge Gazette: free classes for seniors reading, writing, email, technology, memory, journaling. Tuesdays and Thursdays at the Foglight Room. At first, only 3 people showed up. A man named Earl, who had worked construction his whole life but never learned to type. Mrs. Dalloway, not her real name, but she insisted on it, who carried a tattered copy of Virginia Woolf in her tote and wanted to discuss metaphors. and a soft-spoken Korean woman named Sun-hee who brought her grandson's iPad and whispered, "I want to FaceTime with my sister." They sat in folding chairs, awkward and unsure, but Evelyn greeted them like old friends. She poured tea, Mia handed out printed guides, and they began. One keystroke at a time, one sentence, one memory. By the end of the first month, they had 9 regulars. By the second, 15. Word spread not through social media, but through sidewalks, community boards, and conversations in grocery store aisles. "I heard she's teaching seniors to text. They're writing their life stories over there. She helped me log into Facebook for the first time. I saw my great-granddaughter." Every Tuesday and Thursday, Evelyn stood at the front of the room in a navy sweater, sleeves rolled up, her voice clear and warm. "This is a mouse," she would say, holding it up. "It won't bite you." The laughter that followed was gentle healing. Mia became her right hand. She designed the flyers, coordinated the schedules, set up the tech. But more than that, she connected. She helped the others one-on-one. She showed Sun-hee how to record voice messages and helped Earl set up an email. "Thank you," one woman said after class. "No one's looked me in the eye this long in months." The foglight room became a second home, not just for the elderly, but for Evelyn. She wasn't just healing, she was blooming. On one particular Thursday afternoon, as the winter light stretched long across the library floor, Evelyn stood by the window watching the people filter in canes and cardigans, laughter and stories, and felt a fullness she hadn't known in years. Mia came to stand beside her. "You built something real, Grandma." "We built it." Mia smiled. "Do you miss the house?" Evelyn thought about it. About the porch swing, the smell of old cedar, the sound of Alfred's voice echoing in the hallway, Derek's childhood drawings taped to the fridge, the piano she hadn't touched since the betrayal. And then she looked around, at the shelves lined with donated books, at the faces lighting up with each new skill, at the way sunlight danced across the keys of a laptop where Mrs. Dalloway typed her first poem. "No," Evelyn said. "I brought the best parts with me." Spring came slowly to Ashbridge that year. It didn't announce itself with wild blossoms or sudden heat. It crept in quietly through the cracks in the sidewalk, through the thawed grass in the park, and through the way the library windows no longer fogged in the morning. Evelyn had just finished filing the week's sign-in sheets at the foglight room when she heard his voice. "Still saving the world one sentence at a time, Evelyn." She turned. There, in a corduroy jacket 2 sizes too big and shoes too scuffed for Sunday best, stood Harold Finch. Gray-haired, clean-shaven glasses perched too low on his nose. Her heart didn't skip a beat. It softened. "Harold Finch," she said, smiling slowly. "I thought you moved to California." "I did, briefly. Turns out palm trees don't suit me." They stared for a moment, old friends, in the quiet, sun-drenched corner of a life neither of them expected to still be writing. Harold had been Alfred's colleague at the high school years ago. He taught history, dry facts, long wars, forgotten treaties, but somehow made it sound like poetry. His wife passed away 5 winters ago. He'd left town soon after too many memories crowding the walls. And now suddenly here he was again in Evelyn's chapter. "Coffee?" he asked. She didn't hesitate, always. They met the next morning at a small cafe just off Elm and Rosewood. The tables were wobbly, the muffins too dry, but the coffee was hot and the sun poured in like honey through the window panes. They talked for 3 hours, about everything and nothing, about the students they used to teach, about how the world was changing faster than anyone could keep up with, about Mia's quick wit and Harold's stubborn knees, about grief and healing, and how neither one of them had planned for this gentle companionship so late in life. Like a surprise sentence at the end of a well-worn book. Their meetings became ritual. Fridays at the cafe, Sundays in the park, Tuesdays. Harold began dropping by the foglight room to check on the maps, which Evelyn quickly discovered was code for sneaking in pastries and quietly helping seniors log into Ancestry.com. And then one Thursday morning, Evelyn opened her apartment door to find a boy on her stoop. Thin, pale, clutching a backpack too big for his frame. "Keith," she said, shocked. He nodded. "Hi." Her breath caught. Candace's nephew. The one she'd weaponized like a pawn during her manipulative visit. The boy Evelyn had never met, but who now stood trembling, rainwater dripping from his sleeves, eyes red. "What happened?" she asked, voice low. "I didn't know where else to go." Evelyn opened the door wide. Inside, he sat on the couch staring at his shoes. "She yells all the time," he whispered. "She says I'm a burden, that I'm lucky to have a roof at all." Evelyn felt something deep inside her break again. "I didn't know where else to go," he repeated. "You said that already," she replied softly. "And you're here now." Keith slept on the pull-out sofa that night. The next day, Evelyn enrolled him in a nearby charter school. Mia brought him a stack of clean clothes and a refurbished laptop. Harold donated his old bicycle. And just like that, the quiet apartment bloomed. Keith wasn't easy. He was angry, suspicious. He kept to himself, flinched at raised voices, and asked no questions. But he also listened, closely, always, and slowly, like fog receding from a window, he thawed. He started asking Evelyn about grammar, then about poetry, then about life. "You're not like her," he said one day. "I know. Why are you helping me?" She thought for a long time before answering. "Because someone needs to break the pattern." One Sunday afternoon, Evelyn and Harold sat on a wooden bench at Willow Park. The cherry trees had begun to bloom, scattering petals across the grass like faded confetti. Keith kicked a soccer ball with Mia in the distance. "They're good together," Harold said, nodding toward them. "They are. And you look peaceful." Evelyn smiled. "I am." The sun hung low in the sky, warming the tops of their heads. Birds swooped across the branches. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. Harold reached out, and Evelyn took his hand. No fireworks, no music swell, just skin to skin, warmth meeting warmth, and the quiet understanding that sometimes even after the fire, something soft can rise from the ashes, not as a replacement, but as a beginning. The anniversary fell on a Thursday. A year since Evelyn had first opened the doors of the Foglight room. A year since she sold the house, walked away from the ruins of betrayal, and chose a new kind of life. It had been 12 months of steady breath, of unexpected laughter, of late-night tears and small victorious beginnings. The room had changed. Where once there had been peeling paint and rickety chairs, now stood bookshelves lined with worn but beloved paperbacks, humming computers, bulletin boards covered in Polaroids. Photographs of students, grinning seniors, learning to text, to code, to remember. Smiles stitched together with effort, resilience, and coffee breaks. A hand-painted banner stretched above the door. 1 year of light. 1 year of voice. "Thank you, Evelyn." She tried to stop them from planning anything. "I'm not one for fuss," she'd told Mia. But Mia had only smiled. "Too bad. You started something bigger than you, Grandma." And so they gathered more than 40 of them. Students, neighbors, librarians, volunteers. Harold dressed in his least wrinkled shirt. Keith, hair slicked, standing taller now. Even the mayor had sent a letter of recognition, framed and quietly hung near the checkout desk. Mia stood at the front, cue cards in her hand. Evelyn sat near the window, cheeks tinged, pink fingers folded in her lap. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mia began, voice already thick with emotion. "Today, we honor not just a program, but a person. Someone who taught us that it's never too late to begin again. Someone who looked at the broken pieces of her life and chose to build something beautiful from them." She paused, looking at Evelyn. "My grandmother, Evelyn Monroe, is not just the founder of this room. She is its heart, its courage, its spine." Laughter, soft claps. "I watched her survive betrayal. I watched her reclaim her dignity. And I watched her forgive without forgetting. That takes more strength than any of us will ever understand." Evelyn's hands trembled slightly. Mia smiled. "Some of you know parts of her story. Some of you lived it with her. But today isn't about what she lost. It's about what she gave. Community, space, time, and love." She turned a quiet room into a sanctuary for those who thought they had no voice left. Murmurs of agreement filled the space. Mia looked down for a moment. "She taught me what resilience looks like. She showed me that healing isn't loud, it's steady, and it's real. She's the bravest person I know." The room erupted into applause. Evelyn covered her mouth, blinking quickly. She wasn't used to this kind of spotlight. She'd spent most of her life in the wings, behind a son, beside a husband, beneath expectations. Now for the first time she stood at the center. Later that evening, when the banners came down and the cake had been cut, Evelyn sat alone in her apartment. The room was still, and golden shadows soft along the floor. A framed picture of Alfred sat on the writing desk beside her. She opened her notebook. The leather was worn, the pages filled with sentences written in midnight ink. She turned to a new page and wrote, March 16th, Year 1. She paused. The window beside her revealed the world outside, dimly lit rooftops, the faint pulse of distant street lamps, and the echo of something both ancient and new. Evelyn picked up her pen again. Alfred, she whispered softly, I've crossed the fog now. Her hand trembled gently as she wrote, I found the light, and I'm still walking toward it. You would have been proud. I'm proud. She closed the notebook. Then she leaned back in her chair, breathing deep. The fog had once stolen her sense of direction, her certainty, her name. But now she was something more than survivor. She was teacher, builder, healer, and in the silence of that final moment, pen resting on her lap, the soft wind teasing the edges of the curtains, Evelyn smiled, not at memory, but at everything still ahead.